Am I Evil by Jack Mangan. Based on Am I Evil by Brian Tatler and Sean Harris, originally released on the album Lightning to the Nations by Diamond Head, 1980. Chapter 13. The mute of the white and the incessant shrill chime in my ears had blocked the sound of their hooves, but I heard his words clearly. Tituba, my witch, dispel this web. With surreal effect, the whiteness of the air over the silence dissipated to nothing, as if it had never existed. The sun shone radiantly from cloudless blue upon the lake and all of us, its warmth a balm on my skin. Approaching us in the ice was a small cavalcade of riders and horses, all bedecked in the finest raiments and gilded armor plate, silks, gold, steel, lavenders, purples. I recognized Tatler among them, his cape resplendent and flowing across the ornate saddle of his warhorse. He set himself in a position of authority and deference to the left of another rider, a man of about David's age, with shoulder-length, straight blonde hair, a reed-thin mustache, and pale eyes. His riding posture exuded command. His light-chain shirt bore a lavish, gold-bordered crest of a silver diamond. The dozen or so armored guardsmen assumed a natural riding perimeter around him, the bulwark of human protection for this one man. The prince. I'd never seen him in person, but there could be no doubt. To his left, an unarmored woman of dark complexion rode a salt and pepper steed. A long cloak of red satin clasped at her throat, shimmering down across her horse's saddlebags. For a fleeting moment, as the cloud evaporated, her eyes had shone with the same brilliance I'd seen in my mother, just before she died. The witch looked at Rhea and me with a confident smirk, but then squinted up at the rotted corruption of my mother above. The lich shrieked again, louder than before. Rhea remained still, but I crouched forward at the sound, clutching at the throbbing pain in my temples. A scattering of lightning strikes seemed to come from the clear blue above, punching holes in the ice all around us. 1, 2, 3 explosions. One only a few yards to my right. The prince's voice overrode again, as if the very force of nature would yield to his speech. Tituba, I've seen enough. Repel the ghoul. The dark-skinned woman spoke with confidence of her own. Yes, your highness. Tituba pulled a small, polished shield from a saddlebag, aimed its flat surface upward at Lilith. A light cast somehow from its plane, as if a dozen brilliant suns were embedded inside it. The touch of this beam had an immediate effect. Lilith, my mother, began to writhe in her mid-air place, shrieking now in agony. Smoke rose from her exposed skin and bones wherever it touched, with steam billowing out from her lake-mold garments. Tituba held her a moment, still smirking, then tossed the plate shield downward into the waters, just beyond the ice lip. Lilith was pulled screaming after it, as if in pursuit, plummeting once again back home, to the bottom of the lake. I was aware of my jaw hanging open, with some naive part of me despairing once more for my mother's redemption. Am I foolish? Yes, I am. The prince was far less impressed, as if this sort of thing were mundane to him. Is she secured? He asked his witch. For a decade or so, Highness. And Clef at her side, Tatler said, nudging his horse a step forward. Perhaps this was the end he sought all along. I looked at Rhea. She returned my awestruck glance. I wondered if some new danger had befallen us. I turned to the newcomers, Diamond Head in hand. Who the hell are you? Myriad reactions among the riding party, some amused, some deeply offended. Tatler spoke with a protective growl to his voice. Show some respect, boy. The man before you is the prince, your liege, and he just saved your hide. None of the casual friendliness from our first meeting. It's all right, thank you, Tatler, said the prince, keeping his eyes on me. Well met, Vander Harris. Rhea. I'll have the Diamond Head back now. His voice almost seemed to bear some enchantment of its own. I felt powerless to resist. Hesitantly, I approached the horses. The royal guard and Tatler made no overt moves, but their tense readiness was clear to all. I held the sword out in its scabbard, hilt first, toward the prince. bowed to one knee, holding it above my head. I was nervously aware of Rhea at my side. "It's not completed," I said. "Cliff didn't get a chance to finish the work you requested." He took it from me, slid the blade partially free of its scabbard, examining the watered steel. "Imperfection seems to have served you fairly well." We rode out from the capital immediately, as soon as my witch heard disturbances on the wind. But alas, we were moments too late to save Cliff. He was a good man, and sometimes evil, when I had need. A shame. My condolences for your loss." Rhea spoke, a slight tremor in her voice. "What is to become of Vander and me now, Prince?" "A powerful young witch and a killer trained by Cliff? You're a threat, more serious than I've known in decades. I'm taking no chances. You'll come with me. Rhea, you'll learn spellcraft from Tituba. Vander, you'll be my apprentice. You can serve me alongside Tatler, in a role once honored by Cliff. Do you accept my offer?" I was dumbstruck, unable to parse the information before me. Rhea was also silent. An impatient look crossed the prince's face. To his left and right, Tatler grinned, and Tituba regained her smirk. The prince said, "If you decline, then you'll both join Lilith in the silence. I ask a second and final time. Do you accept?" I looked into Rhea's face. I felt resolved for myself, but needed to know her feeling. She smiled like a sunrise, looked almost relieved. "We accept," she said, never looking away from me. I smiled back at her, then turned and met the prince's eyes. I nodded once. There's nothing left for me in good now. Chapter 14. Epilogue. My first century still haunts me. Over the past decades, my mind has become like a ghost story manor, a lonely, cavernous, expansive estate filled with creaks, whispers, fleeting visions, misplaced treasures in its dark hallways and dusty rooms. 2 frescoes of youth hang prominently on the walls of this place: the death of my mother and the deliverance of my vengeance upon her killers. The rest is less clear, like a shrouding fog upon the grounds, like fog floating over the silence waters. For Rhea and myself, the first of our ageless decades were an era of unparalleled self-discovery, one that neither of us have matched since. I excelled in swordsmanship, the arts of assassination, and metalcraft. I served my prince. I traveled, read, indulged myself, and sought the company of great artists, poets, musicians, and philosophers. Sometimes I was joined in expeditions by Rhea or the prince and Tituba, but just as often I ventured alone. Long hikes, safaris, epic voyages, dives to the deepest reaches of the seas, hours immersed in tomes of written thoughts and stories, great orgies, mind-numbing narcotics, and the sweaty, deafening release of heavy metal concerts in New Wave Britain. Rhea had quickly become a powerful sorcerer, training and learning spellcraft with Tituba. After about a decade in service, the prince decided we were worthy to be his companions in immortality. Tituba taught Rhea the incantation. She and I have grown close and apart more times than I can remember, as each of us have struggled with the strains of time on our haunted brains. I'm fairly sure we've been married a few times. She has fared far more gracefully than I beneath the hourglass. She is the strongest and wisest creature to ever walk the earth, and the eons have only made her more beautiful to me. I'm grateful to currently be in a phase of togetherness with her, and I dread the next, inevitable time of estrangement. Over the fog-draped centuries, only the big cities and my close relationships changed. Faces have repeated and become as indistinguishable as trees and forests. The last significant evolution began when the technology chrysalis broke, sometime in the early 20th century. Its impact still ripples today. Since then, the metropolitan changes have spread across the countrysides, bringing their wires and wars and concrete and billboards to every place. The last time I visited Good, a small hamlet under its new modern name, had become a paradise of factories and billowing smokestacks. In such a way have I persisted, polluted, finding new purposes for myself, still with the same face but unrecognizable, my face not my own. No children were ever born to us, possibly the price of our ageless enchantment. The prince only caved to impulse once more, for Tatler. So we 6 pledged to remain the world's only immortals, a promise we've all kept, even during our worst periods of animosity. Yes, there is my mother's coven of liches, but I believe we dealt with them. That's a story for another time. By the prince's command, Tatler, the 2 witches, and the 2 of us had held the king's life as our top priority, even as the madness erased his mind. The old man eventually outsmarted us, however, and he carried out his suicide. Except that he did not die. His heart muted, his brain became a shatter, his body a dry wither, but still he lingers, present in there, in some purgatory existence. We all watch the king's deathless fate with horror and self-awareness. His living hell is the lone reason why I haven't ended myself, why I'm here to recount this tale across 4 centuries. Relationships soured and curdled between the 5 of us in the decades that followed. The details don't matter. Let's just say that slights have been perceived and declarations of vengeance have been issued. Contempt becomes something murderous when it's given decades to fester. Through clever shifts of identity and rearrangements of royal lineage among distant relatives and their descendants, the prince has remained wealthy and powerful, but freed of the burdens of royalty and rule. Thus, he can focus all of his tremendous resources on his greatest campaign, Rhea and me. He seeks nothing less than his father's accursed fate for us both. It's the reason for my recent reunion with Rhea, to ensure our survival against the prince and his witch. The hatred between us burns mutual, an irrational, unstoppable fire. I also yearn for the chance to reduce the prince to pure torment, to lock him in unending death life. Does Cliff's old question still apply after all this time for one such as me? Am I evil? Over the past 400 years, I've been the prince's apprentice, his friend, confidant, ally, rival, combatant, opponent, and more. But here and now, in this time, I am his enemy. We are at war. Rhea and I have an army of our own. We're small enough to fit inside these few transport helicopters, but we're ready for anything. Descent. My watch reads 11:58 p.m. The prince and his warriors await us in the rose garden below. On with the action now. The end. Am I Evil? By Jack Mangan. Read by Jack Mangan. That's me, by the way. Based on the original Diamond Head song, written by Sean Harris and Brian Tatler. Comic book cover art by James F. Beveridge. Interior panels, everything, the lettering, the pencils, the colors, all by Kyle Burles, aka Kyohazard. My eternal gratitude to Kyle and James. Also to Brian Tatler and Sean Harris. Also to Rhea Dinas, that's right, her name is Rhea, for connecting me with all these artists. And also my eternal gratitude to Derek Ma for all of the time and heart and soul that he gave this project. And I want to thank you for listening to this, the Am I Evil novella. And I do hope you'll support in one way or another, or pick up a copy of Am I Evil, the graphic novel. Thank you very much. All right, the final part of this audio, I will read off the names of all of the backers from the Indiegogo campaign that made the initial comic book possible, the e-comic release. To be blunt, if you're not listening for your name, it could be a little bit tedious and boring to listen to, so I will not be offended if you click away now. I'll just say thank you again one more time. Otherwise, if you're a backer, yeah, listen for your name. Here we go. Diamond backers. Melanie Anderson, David Catterin, David Phillips, Paul Fisher, Tracy Swatfager, Ray Adinas, Penny Mangan. Backers: Matt Luck, Patrick Gerald, Joseph Margiotta, Ash Morgan, Gilbert Garcia, Michael Easterwood, Edward Klein, Mangan8741, Lost Ralph, Corey Kuhlman, Eric Schneider, Sleepy Stephen Wood, Solia, Chris Olier, Jesse Flynn, LeJohn Johnson, Anthony Lamora, J.R. Murdoch, Tiffany Mangan, Andrew Cotter, Brett Hastings, Rich Gattino, Amelia Bowen, Kevin Fuller, Ray Murphy, Lee Roberts, John Chinnock, Tony Mast, Paul Martinez, Will Kemp, Mike Murphy, plus our 15 anonymous donors. You know who you are, and we know and appreciate you too. All right, I do also have to read this off. I also wish to thank the following for advice, support, feedback, input, help, phone calls, lunches, kicks in the head, or some combination of the above. Diamond Head, Brian Tatler, Sean Harris, Rasmus Baum Anderson, Tiffany Mangan, Sophie Mangan, H. Jackie Mangan, Rich Gattino, Ray Adinas, Derek Ma, James F. Beveridge, Richard P. Clark, Cheyenne Wright, Pete Allen, Adam P. Nave, John Bambino, Michael Alago, Scott Sigler, Tom Hazard, Bobby Blitz Ellsworth, Alan Tecchio, T. Morris, PJ Ballantyne, Evo Terra, Sheila D., J.R. Murdoch, Tony Mast, Jack Frost, Pat Gesualdo, Casper Taylor, Joe Krim, Ron Daniels, John Margiotta, Aaron Mast, Farhad Hussein of Schumann, Ben Raggington, and Keith Lane of the TG Geeks podcast, Nutty Nutshus of the Nutty Bites podcast, Jason Gregory Banks, Emery and Rich of HorrorAddicts.net, John Rotolo of the Good Times Universe podcast, Melissa Milner of the Teacher As podcast, Eric Haley, Alvy Selmer, and the four guys who introduced me and much of the world to Am I Evil: James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Cliff Burton, and Kirk Hammett.